The first thing Bakugo Katsuki did when Aizawa told him his punishment was laugh. It came out wrong, too sharp, too short, more bark than laugh. Because for half a second he thought it was a joke. Some kind of test. Aizawa's face, flat and unimpressed as a brick wall, said otherwise. You broke a civilian's camera and threatened a journalist on school grounds, Aizawa said. During an internship that was supposed to be building your professional record. I could suspend your provisional license review. I'm choosing not to. He was shoving a microphone in my face after I pulled 3 people out of a collapsed parking structure, Bakugo snapped. He wanted me to smile about it. I know. And you're still going to spend the next month doing supervised community service instead of agency work. Because that's how this works. You don't get to set the terms after you've already broken something. Aizawa held out a folder like it weighed nothing. Like it wasn't about to ruin Bakugo's entire month. UA's bridge program. Examinees who didn't pass the entrance exam, but qualified for a second chance track. You'll mentor one of them 3 afternoons a week until your hours are served. I'm not a babysitter. You're not being asked to be one. You're being asked to show up and not set anything on fire. Given your recent track record, I understand that may be a stretch. Bakugo took the folder because there wasn't another option that didn't involve getting his license review pushed back a full year, and he was not, under any circumstances, for any reason, losing a year. He didn't open it until he was alone in the dorm stairwell, and when he did, the first thing he saw was a photograph stapled to an intake form. Some kid, narrow shoulders, dark hair sticking up like he'd lost a fight with a hairbrush, staring dead into the camera with an expression that had no business being that stubborn on someone who'd just failed the most important test of his life. Itsuki Renji. Age 15. Quirk. None. Practical exam score. 0 villain points, 41 rescue points. Bakugo read it twice. Then he sat down on the stairs, because his legs had stopped agreeing to hold him up, and read it a third time. 0 villain points. Quirkless. A kid who'd walked into the most physically dangerous exam in the country with nothing in his arsenal but his own body, and had still scraped together 41 rescue points trying to save people he couldn't actually save. Because he didn't have a quirk that did anything useful. Because he didn't have a quirk at all. Bakugo closed the folder. He knew exactly whose face this kid's stubborn, idiot expression reminded him of, and he hated it instantly, with the kind of pure, uncomplicated hatred that was easier to hold onto than anything else he might have felt instead. The bridge program trained out of a battered annex building on the edge of campus that smelled like rubber mats and old sweat, and Itsuki Renji was already there when Bakugo arrived, 15 minutes early. Running laps around a cone course by himself with the kind of grim, joyless focus of someone who decided exhaustion was a renewable resource. You're Itsuki. The kid stopped mid-stride, chest heaving, and looked at him with an expression that flickered, for exactly 1 second, into something like recognition, like awe. Like he knew exactly who Bakugo was and what he'd done, at the sports festival and in the field against actual villains, and then it shut off like a switch, replaced by careful neutrality. Yes, sir, don't call me sir. I'm 17. Bakugo dropped the folder onto a bench hard enough that it skidded. I'm Bakugo. I got stuck babysitting you for a month, because I broke some idiot's camera. I didn't choose this. I don't want to be here. So let's not waste each other's time. What's your actual plan? You're quirkless? You scored 0 on combat. You really think a second try fixes that? He watched the kid's jaw tighten. Watched him not flinch. Not look away. Not do any of the things Bakugo expected, wanted if he was being honest with the ugly part of himself. Because some small, vicious corner of him needed this kid to crack immediately so Bakugo could write him off as a lost cause and stop thinking about him. I got 41 rescue points with nothing, Renji said. Most kids who pass don't even break 30 on rescue. Because they're spending all their effort on combat. I know what I don't have. I'm not stupid. I'm asking what I do have and how to use more of it. Bakugo stared at him for a long moment. That's the dumbest thing I've heard all week, he said, and meant it. And also felt something behind his sternum twist in a way he didn't have a name for yet. He made the kid run until he threw up the first week. Not out of cruelty, or not only out of cruelty, but because Bakugo genuinely didn't know how else to evaluate someone with nothing on the table but a body, and bodies, at least, were honest. They told you exactly how much someone actually wanted something underneath all the talk. Renji's body said a lot. He had no quirk to fall back on, No shortcut. No second option when the first one failed, which meant every single rep, every sprint, every awkward, ugly attempt at a fall and recovery drill was just him raw, trying to brute force his way into competence through sheer repetition. He fell down constantly. He got back up constantly. By the end of the second week he could do a controlled tuck and roll that didn't look like a sack of bricks down a staircase anymore, and the only acknowledgement Bakugo gave him was a grunt and again. "You're not gonna say it's good?" Renji asked once, breathless, sweat dripping off his chin onto the mat. "It's not good. It's not terrible. That's worse than good, actually, because terrible means there's nowhere to go but up, and not terrible means you have to keep working just to stay where you are." Bakugo crossed his arms. "Welcome to having no quirk." Again, he didn't notice he'd said it like he understood something about it, like there was an actual ache underneath the contempt, until Renji looked at him a beat too long before doing what he was told. The notebook was what did it. What actually cracked something open in Bakugo that he'd have preferred to keep welded shut. He found it by accident, flipping through Renji's gym bag for a spare towel, because the kid had split his lip open on a badly executed fall, and was currently holding his own face together with a wad of gauze. The notebook fell out, spine cracked from overuse, and Bakugo, out of nothing more than reflexive curiosity, opened it. Pages and pages of handwriting, cramped and urgent, analyzing pro heroes' fighting styles, footwork diagrams, estimated reaction times. A whole section, 4 pages deep, dissecting how heroes with no offensive quirk at all, support type, emitter types with purely defensive applications, had still made it onto agency rosters, broken down by technique, by positioning, by how they made themselves useful when their quirk couldn't do the job alone. There was a page analyzing Bakugo's own sports festival fight against Todoroki. Not the explosions, the footwork, the way he'd repositioned mid-blast to control distance even when his stun grenade had failed. Renji had drawn little arrows. He'd written "why does this work even when the attack doesn't land?" and then, underneath it, in smaller handwriting like he hadn't wanted anyone to see it. Because positioning isn't a power. Anyone can learn it. Bakugo sat very still, holding a notebook that didn't belong to him, looking at 4 pages of a kid trying to reverse engineer hero work into something a class body could survive doing. It was exactly the kind of notebook a different kid used to carry around a decade ago, scribbling in margins about quirks that weren't his. Building a hero out of nothing but obsession and longing and the refusal to accept that nothing was the end of the story. Bakugo had called that kid useless for the better part of 10 years, had called him Deku like it was an insult before either of them knew it could mean something else, had told him, more than once, in language he still woke up hating himself for, that wanting something he couldn't have was the same as being pathetic. He closed Renji's notebook very carefully and put it back exactly where he'd found it, and when Renji limped back over with gauze still stuck to his lip, Bakugo didn't say anything about it at all. He just said again and watched the kid get up without complaint, and felt something in his chest that he refused to call what it actually was. It went wrong in the 4th week, the way these things tend to. Renji had been pushing distance falls, heights, real ones, off a 6-foot platform onto crash mats, working up incrementally the way Bakugo had structured it. Slow, controlled. The kind of progression that built competence without breaking anybody. Renji decided slow wasn't fast enough. Bakugo turned his back for 90 seconds to grab water, and when he turned around, the kid was climbing a 14-foot scaffold rig meant for upperclassmen drills, the kind that needed a spotter and a harness. Neither of which he had, because apparently he'd decided that if 0 villain points meant he had to be twice as fast as everyone else, then he'd just skip the boring parts. Itsuki, he didn't make it. Bakugo's voice cracked across the gym a half-second too late, and Renji either didn't hear, or didn't care, and he jumped. The fall was bad. Not catastrophic. He hit the mat at a half-decent angle on instinct, rolled wrong, and skidded into the support pole hard enough that Bakugo heard the crack from across the room and felt his stomach drop straight through the floor. He was there before he registered moving. Renji was curled around his own left arm, face white, breathing in short controlled hisses through his teeth, controlled, even now, even in pain, like he'd trained himself not to scream because screaming wasted energy he might need. And Bakugo grabbed him by the shoulder hard enough to hurt and didn't care. "What is wrong with you?" His voice came out raw, too loud, shaking in a way he hated. "You don't have a quirk to catch you. You don't get the safety net everyone else gets. You climbed something like that without a spotter, without a harness, and you could have actually, I know, Renji said, through his teeth, eyes wet but not crying, jaw clenched so hard it looked painful on its own. I know what I don't have. You think I don't think about it? I think about it every single night. Every single rep. I think about every kid in that program who's gonna pass next year with some power I'll never get. And I get up anyway, because the alternative is quitting, and I'm not. His voice cracked. I'm not gonna quit. So yeah, maybe I push too hard, because pushing too hard is the only advantage I've got over kids who don't have to. Bakugo knelt there on the mat with his hand locked on a 15-year-old shoulder and a sentence sitting in his throat that he hadn't said out loud, hadn't even let himself think clearly in almost a decade. You could have told him to give up. You did tell him to give up. For years. And he never did, and you hated him for it. And the only thing that's changed is now you're old enough to know exactly what that hatred actually was. He didn't say any of that. He wasn't ready, and Renji had a fractured wrist and needed recovery girl, not a confession. Up, Bakugo said instead, voice still shaking but quieter now. We're going to recovery girl, and on the way you're going to explain to me exactly which part of controlled progression sounded optional, because I'm having trouble locating it. He sat in the hallway outside recovery girl's office while she set the wrist, and he thought, with the kind of brutal honesty he usually reserved for analyzing his own fights, about every single thing he'd ever said to a green-haired, freckled kid who used to follow him around a playground like a stray dog hoping for scraps of approval he never got. Useless. Pathetic. You'll never be a hero. Stop wasting your time wanting something you can't have. He'd told himself for years it was motivation. Tough love. That Izuku needed someone to be honest with him about the odds, and Bakugo had decided, somewhere in elementary school, that honest and cruel were the same word, because cruel was easier. Because cruel didn't require him to sit with the fact that some quiet, ugly part of him had been afraid, actually afraid, of a kid with nothing who refused to stop trying anyway. Afraid of what it meant about effort, about deserving things, about a world where talent wasn't supposed to need to share the stage with want. He'd been wrong about almost everything that mattered, for almost 10 years, and the person who'd paid for it had never once made him answer for it directly, which was somehow worse than if he had. Bakugo sat in that hallway with his elbows on his knees and his hands laced together so tight his knuckles went white, and made a decision that had nothing to do with community service hours and everything to do with the fact that he was not going to let this happen twice. When Recovery Girl finished, Renji came out with his wrist in a cast and his face still doing the thing, where it refused to look anything but stubborn. And Bakugo was waiting for him with his arms crossed and an expression that, for once, wasn't contempt. You're benched from falls for 2 weeks, Bakugo said. Doesn't mean you stop. It means we work footwork, distance control, and reading an opponent's stance, because none of that needs 2 working hands. And starting tomorrow we're doing this at the training ground at sunrise, before classes. Because apparently regular hours aren't enough to keep you from doing something stupid out of boredom. Renji blinked. You're not supposed to be doing extra hours. Your service is just the assigned afternoons. I'm aware of what I'm supposed to do. Bakugo's jaw worked for a second. I'm choosing this part. He didn't explain why, and Renji, smart enough not to push his luck twice in one day, didn't ask. The training ground Bakugo picked was an old outdoor lot on the edge of campus that UA used for disaster response drills, currently a mess of debris and broken concrete left over from a typhoon 2 weeks back. Scheduled for cleanup by maintenance crews sometime that month, but not yet touched. Slabs of cracked pavement. Twisted rebar. A whole landscape of obstacles nobody had bothered to clear, because it wasn't anybody's job yet. It was, Bakugo thought, looking at it in the gray half-light before sunrise, exactly the kind of useless, ugly, unglamorous mess that nobody became a hero by training on. And exactly the kind of place that built something nobody could see from the outside. He remembered he couldn't not remember, a beach a long time ago. Trash for miles. A scrawny kid with nothing but want in his hands, sent there for months by the greatest hero in the world to do nothing but haul garbage, build muscle nobody clapped for. Because greatness apparently had to be earned in places where no one was watching and nothing was given. He hadn't understood it then. He'd thought it was a joke, the #1 hero wasting his time on a kid with nothing. He understood it now in a way that sat heavy and uncomfortable in his chest. Because the difference between that beach and this lot was the one thing Bakugo couldn't get past no matter how he turned it over. All Might had a quirk to give away. A power literally passed down, hand to hand, earned through labor but ultimately bestowed. Bakugo didn't have anything like that. There was no secret inheritance waiting at the end of this. No power transfer, no miracle, no morning where Renji woke up suddenly capable of something his body had never been able to do. Bakugo had explosions sweated out of his own palms and nobody else's. And there was no version of this where he could hand that down even if he wanted to. All he had was time and technique and the brutal, ordinary truth that some things just had to be built by hand, slowly, by people willing to show up before the sun did. Why here? Renji asked, surveying the wreckage with his good hand shoved in his jacket pocket, cast tucked against his side. Because nobody's coming to clear it for you, Bakugo said. And because you're going to learn to move through unstable ground, red collapsed terrain, and protect your weak side, all while doing something actually useful instead of running laps for the sake of running laps. Pick up that rebar. Carefully, we are clearing a working lane first, then we drill. Renji picked up the rebar. They worked for 2 hours before the sun was fully up, hauling debris, stacking broken concrete, clearing a 10-meter lane through the wreckage piece by piece, and Bakugo found himself, somewhere in the second hour, not barking orders anymore but working alongside, hauling a slab off a section of cracked pavement so Renji could get his good arm under the smaller pieces without overcorrecting for the cast. You don't have to help carry, Renji said, breathing hard, sweat cutting tracks through the dust on his face. This is supposed to be my work. It's not charity, Bakugo said. It's faster with 2 people. And I don't have all morning to wait around while you figure out leverage with one hand. He dropped the slab where Renji pointed, dust kicking up around both their shoes. Don't read into it, Renji almost smiled. Didn't quite, like he understood, by now, 3 weeks in, exactly how far he was allowed to push that particular door before it slammed. But the corner of his mouth twitched in a way that told Bakugo he wasn't fooling anyone. They cleared the lane as the light came up gold and ugly over the broken lot. Dust hanging in the air, both of them filthy and aching, and when it was done Renji stood at the end of it, looking back down the path they'd made through the wreckage, with his cast-bound arm cradled against his ribs, and an expression on his face that Bakugo recognized down to the bone, because he'd seen it before, years ago. On a rooftop, on a kid who just realized that useless and worthless had never actually been the same word, no matter how many times someone had told him they were. Footwork, Bakugo said, before either of them could let the moment get any softer than it already had. Cleared lane, broken ground at the edges. You're going to cross it without using your bad arm for balance, and you're going to do it until your legs remember the terrain better than your eyes do. Move, Renji moved. He stumbled twice in the first pass, recovered both times without falling, found his footing on the third, and Bakugo stood at the edge of the cleared lane in the gray-gold morning light, arms crossed. Watching a quirkless kid teach his own body something no power on earth could have handed him for free, and felt, for the first time in longer than he wanted to admit, something that wasn't contempt and wasn't pity and wasn't guilt dressed up as either one. It was something closer to the thing he'd never let himself feel toward a different kid for almost 10 years, back when it would have cost him nothing and meant everything, and arrived now, late and unglamorous and entirely too small for what it owed. In the wreckage of a typhoon nobody had bothered to clean up yet. Again, Bakugo said, and his voice, for once, didn't sound like an insult at all. Renji planted his feet on the broken ground and did it again.